Good evening. It's March 27th, 2025, and welcome to another one of our branches on the vine. The folks at Aleph Beta. Yeah? I love these things. This series that we're doing is great because I enjoy the connections across Scripture, the ideas of putting ourselves in others' shoes, right? Putting on their sandals, understanding these characters. Because I'm reminded that these were real people with honest agendas. And here at TheDustyFeet, we try on sandals for the good and the not so good. So this series from Rabbi David Fohrman caught my attention, right? Could you become Haman? I was intrigued by what I saw, and so I thought we might want to discuss it. So here we go with Could We Become Haman? This is our part 3 on TheDustyFeet. And before we forget, if you do find these kinds of podcasts useful, it's when you click that subscribe button. Those reminders, they just help you. But also, you think these might be useful to others, that is when you click that like button, because that is how YouTube chooses to share these to more people, if they wish. The Scroll of Esther. Interesting story. Only 2 scrolls in the entire canon of Scripture we have that don't mention God by name, Esther and the Song of Solomon. So in case you didn't realize it, there's what we're at. But this story, what's behind this scroll, I think it's well worth our time. I expect this now to be a 4, probably 5-part series as we explore the history, culture, and the connections that put us in this story about Esther and the rescue from attempted genocide. So remember, we have Haman and Zeresh, right, and their dynamic. We're going to get another couple. We're going to get their dynamic and the people involved in this and their dynamics. We're going to see inverses, mirrors, people acting in the roles as God intended them to be and some not. We'll get there, some of our discussion. I know I'm looking forward to it. Because we see how the decisions made in the garden, maybe they could have been different. Maybe they'd changed if they'd been considered differently. Because if we follow the line in this story, I think we're going to have a different outcome. So let's look at the next section because it's going to walk us there. I love that. Let's watch the next video, discuss it, see what's on the other end. Enjoy.
So, thus far we've seen one tree of knowledge story in the Megillah, the story of Haman and Zeresh. I want to make an audacious suggestion to you that there is actually a second tree of knowledge story playing out in the Megillah at the same time. If the first story involves the bad guys, Haman and Zeresh, the second tree of knowledge story involves the good guys, Mordecai and Esther. What we're going to see is that as we go through the story involving Mordecai and Esther, we're going to find a whole series of literary parallels linking us back to the Tree of Knowledge here too. What does it all mean? Well, we'll have to trace the parallels and see where the evidence points us. But the intriguing possibility here is that perhaps Mordecai and Esther are struggling with the same issue that Haman and Zeresh were struggling with. What do we mean when we talk about good? Do you confuse the good in the sense of what I want with the good in the sense of what's right and just and moral? Or can you effectively separate those two and understand the difference between them? But let's not jump too far ahead. Let's look at the parallels that the Megillah lays out for us. Okay, let's go back to the beginning of the Megillah and play this little game. What reminds us of the Garden of Eden here? So do you remember that moment where, Vashti is done away with and the king is all alone? He doesn't have a mate. He doesn't have a wife. So he figures, I'm going to convene a contest. I'm going to gather together all the possible mates and select one among them who I really like. Now, of course, the king, he's a royal guy, and he's going to gather together all these women who, are basically inferior to him on the social totem pole. They're commoners, and he's the king, but it doesn't matter. He's going to accept one of them. He doesn't really care where they come from. And in the end, of course, he picks Esther. Now, this is one of those moments in the Megillah where you sort of seem to see at least the hidden hand of God. Esther was a 1 in a million pick, and she becomes the secret daughter of Israel in the palace, and later on, of course, she's going to become instrumental to saving the Jews. So it might seem fair to say that at least on some level, God is the one that picks out this mate for Ahasuerus. So now stand back and ask yourself, does this remind you of anything at the very beginning of Genesis? Where else in the entire Hebrew Bible do you find a contest convened in which there are all of these possible mates, people who are sort of inherently inferior, that are convened to see if this special person could find a mate among them? And in the end, he doesn't find any of those. He finds a special person picked for him by God himself. You find it back in the Garden of Eden. Adam is all alone. God convenes all of Adam's inferiors, the beasts of the field, in an attempt to find someone who could be his special mate. In the end, Adam rejects all of the animals one by one until God puts him to sleep. But he wakes up to find the mate that God himself has chosen for him, a special person by the name of Eve. And almost to hammer home the comparison between the two stories, the Megillah lets you know the device that Ahasuerus used to select the special mate. He would call her by name. Lo tavo od el hamelech, ki im chafetz ba hamelech v'nikra'a b'shem. Any given woman would never come back to the king unless he called her by name. What does that remind you of in the garden? Naming was the device that Adam as well had used to try and find the special mate. God had paraded all the animals in front of him, and he named them all, and he rejects them. He knows their names, as it were, and will never call them back again, just like the king, except for one, whose name delights him. It's Eve. Her name, Isha, signifies why she is perfect for him, why he will want to spend the rest of his life with her. Isha, the hey at the end of Ish, means from Ish, from man. It's like he's saying, I've called her by name and I know she's perfect for me. It's like later on, the king will select his queen only by calling her by name. Now, if it was just this, you might say, well, that's a very interesting coincidence. 2 beauty contests in the entire Tanakh, and the other one just happens to be in the story of the creation of Eve way back in the prelude to the Tree of Knowledge. But even if I accept that, you said that this was a forbidden fruit story, another Tree of Knowledge story. How is that the case? Well, let's keep on reading. So Eve has been created, and there she is in the garden. And she's surrounded by all these trees. And she can eat from all these trees. Life is pretty unrestricted. But there is this one command that she has to follow. There's this forbidden fruit, and it contains this mysterious forbidden knowledge. And Adam and Eve are both told that if they get this knowledge, they're going to die, they're going to become mortal. Ultimately, of course, Eve does take the fruit, and she gives it to her husband to share in this forbidden knowledge. And now, let's come back to the Megillah. After the beauty contest, what happened? Is there a command given to the Megillah's version of Eve? Is there forbidden knowledge which she dare not impart to her husband? Absolutely. It's her identity that becomes the forbidden knowledge. Esther is chosen queen, the Megillah says, but Ein Esther Magedet Moladata. Esther would not tell of her identity, her birthplace, that she was in fact a daughter of Israel. Ka'asher tziva aleh Mordechai, because Mordechai had commanded her not to. One more time, there's a woman who must not impart knowledge to her husband. It's forbidden knowledge. It could get you killed. And by the way, it's not just the general idea that's the same here. The language is the same here. Back in Eden, Vayitzav Hashem Elokim ala Adam lemor, God commanded Adam saying, but actually, literally speaking, it's not God commanded Adam. Vayitzav Hashem Elokim al Adam, God commanded upon Adam. It's actually a strange kind of language. It's not the way you would normally say it. But interestingly, that same strange twist appears in the Megillah too. A command upon. Ki Mordechai tziva aleha shelo tagid. Mordechai had commanded upon her not to say anything about where she comes from. And while we're considering language here, if Mordechai really is sort of occupying the God role, as it were, from the Garden of Eden, in other words, God was the one who had commanded Adam and Eve the first time about forbidden knowledge, and now Mordechai is the one issuing those commands to the new Eve, to Esther, about what she must and must not tell her husband. Isn't it interesting that the text talks about him strolling in the palace gates using a very strange word, Mordechai mithalech. Mithalech is a hitpael form of walk, and it's a very unusual form to describe a person walking. It would sort of mean that he took himself for a walk. This is the last time the word mithalech is ever used in the Hebrew Bible. You know when the first time it's used is? Back in the Garden of Eden. When God was mithalech in the Gan, God was strolling in the garden. Seemingly, the Megillah is cueing us in here. Mordechai really is occupying the role of the commander, in this case, the one who commands about forbidden fruit. But if all of this is correct, if the interaction between Mordechai, Esther, and the king really does mimic the Tree of Knowledge story, the Megillah's version of that story is about to get turned on its head. You may be aware that the Megillah is a topsy-turvy book. In the words of the Megillah itself, v'nahafochu, and it was all reversed, and here too. We're going to get an incredible reverse right in the middle of this Tree of Knowledge replay. Mordechai, the very person that had commanded Esther not to impart this forbidden knowledge about her true identity to the king, now comes to her and says, "Tell him the forbidden knowledge." Haman has issued his decree. Now you have to go and tell him who you are and beg him to save your countrymen. The one who says you can't impart that knowledge, whatever you do, never say anything, now says, no, the reverse is true. Go feed the forbidden fruit to your husband. It's interesting that the Megillah, who had used the word before, tzivah, command, to characterize Mordechai's insistence that she not tell, now uses that same word to characterize his insistence that she does tell. In the words of the verse, "Ulitzavot alea lavo ala melach," and he commanded her to come to the king. And what does Esther say in response? She says something that actually fits totally like a glove with his Tree of Knowledge theory. She says, I can't do it. I'll die. Well, if you're thinking Tree of Knowledge, it's no wonder. Whenever you give forbidden knowledge, death is right around the corner. Anybody who goes to the king without being called achat dato lamit, they're taking their lives in their hands, they're going to be killed. And now you want me to go, what? And give this forbidden knowledge, this really unpopular news to the king, that his queen is from that really unpopular nation, the one that his Secretary of State is going to wipe out in one blood-soaked Holocaust-like day? I don't think he's going to take that too well. Yeah, he might have been happy to take a queen from among any commoner. But now that Haman has made the Jews the dregs of society, how happy is he going to be to hear that I'm from them? If it wasn't bad enough that I'm going to go to him when I'm not invited, listen to what I'm telling him. You think he's going to want to hear this? It's going to be off with my head. And now, as if to complete the sense of the complete reversal of the original Tree of Knowledge story, listen to what Mordechai responds to her. No, Esther, you got it the other way around. You got to go to the king. If you keep silent, one way or another God will save us, but you and your father's house are going to be ultimately destroyed. It's death you're worried about? If you don't go to him, that's when you will be destroyed. It's a complete reverse. So she says, fine, I'll take my life in my hands. I'll go to the king and impart to him this forbidden knowledge of who I really am. But then she says, you know, if we're going to play topsy-turvy, I have a command for you. Lech knos et kol hayudim, gather all of the Israelites together. B'tzumu alai, and you and them fast. Al tochlu, do not eat. It's as if Esther is saying to him, you know, it began, Mordechai, when you told me I mustn't share forbidden knowledge. You want me to eat of the forbidden fruit and to give it to my husband? Then I, the commanded, will turn around and make a command of you, and that command of you will be, do not eat. And Mordechai listens. Vayas kechol asher tzivta alav Esther. He did all that she commanded him. So it's like everything has reversed itself, the entire Tree of Knowledge story. And therefore, Esther is now left with a very serious challenge. She's got to tell the king who she really is. It's like Mordechai is telling her, find a way to give that forbidden knowledge to your husband. Way back in the garden, Eve gave Adam that fruit, and the results were disastrous. Now you need to find a way to give him the forbidden knowledge in order to avert a disaster. If she finds a way to accomplish this task, she will redeem that original Tree of Knowledge story. She will go through the exact same act that Eve did when she gave the forbidden fruit to Adam. Using the medium of food, just like Eve at a banquet, she's going to give knowledge that's very, very dangerous to her. She's going to impart this knowledge to her husband. Except that act, instead of being destructive, will be the most compassionate, saving thing in the world. It will not kill, it will save us all. As we shall see, though, Esther faces a very, very great challenge. In order to somehow give this knowledge to the king in the right way, she's going to have to do it in a way that distinguishes between the two types of good. She's going to have to clearly demarcate what desire looks like and how that's different from the right thing to do. When she does that, she will have finally redeemed the great Tree of Knowledge sin. How Esther does this forms the climax of the Megillah's narrative, a climax that we will understand ever more deeply when we keep the Tree of Knowledge in mind as we read it. We'll do that when we come back in our next video.
So yeah, I've liked what we've heard. So go back to the beginning. He mentioned this. He says we have two stories going on parallel. Both have garden stories, meaning the same choices. Because a garden story doesn't necessarily mean we have an Adam and an Eve, right? Although we do kind of here. But the reality is that these people are making the same and different choices. It's going to be interesting to see where we play this out because we also have a king involved. But we see them making these decisions in a parallel story, saying, good, this is what I like. I like the choices made, but when I say it's good, is it really desire? Because if I'm selfish, I think about how to make the system work for me. But if I'm unselfish, I ask, how can I act so that the right and moral and just thing to do would be, and it would happen to me, but rather, really, it should happen to others. Do you see the difference? It depends how you look at it, because you're looking at it. It's all about me. Tends to lean heavily on the desire side with me. But if we consider how this is going to reflect on somebody else, how it's going to impact them, how it changes the perspective that I talk about here a lot, right? Because the phrase I use here often in the Dusty Feet is upside down, right? Thinking this is the opposite way, the upside down way to look at the opposite. I like it because the apparent garden parallels in the story, they're astounding, right? Because we even have the king. It's parading, trying to figure out who's going to replace his wife. And we get this parallel thinking because we see that in the garden story again. And I think it's there. I think it's there because it wants us in this story to start to rethink, as the rabbi says so often, right? Where have we heard this before? This is the point. We're constantly reviewing it. We've seen these patterns before. So if we're unsure and we see these connections, maybe it's helping us realize that it's that much more apparent. Yeah? So I like where the rabbi went with this parade in front of the king, right? That Eve is chosen, placed as the king's mate. And yet as we continue in the story, we're going to see that Esther still has her choices to make, just like Eve, right? Everybody's made choices. Eve's turn is coming up. Because when we look back, we see the result of the choice, and we see the elements in the stories that suggest that even though it was a choice, this one wasn't an easy choice. So do we embrace the turmoil of all the characters involved in all these choices? Because I think there's a difference with this in the Garden of Eden story. At least how we think we might understand it. This is open for discussion. Please talk about this amongst yourselves. I'd like to be there to hear it, but was there any turmoil in the decisions that Adam and Eve made when they were making it? Did we see any struggle, right? I'm not sure it's in the garden. I think the story suggests there might be some inner turmoil. But I think we're going to see as these events unfold that we're looking at it here, and because here they want to make the right call. They want to change things. But she realizes people in this are going to have to give up themselves. We're going to have to give up ourselves. We look back. We just see the result. But in their time, it was a real fear for them. They lived in the moment. And I think that's part of what we lose. We get the results. This is what God wanted all along, right? But I don't think it works that way because we have the garden story. And in this story, and they're feeling it. There's turmoil, both of them in these choices. I think it's how they take that turmoil. We still have to make choices. We hear stories about those choices. And these are not fictional stories, right? They're not supposed to make us feel good. These aren't fictional characters. It's really more quite often as we're discovering. For instance, in the Scroll of Judges in our Outside the Class series, that the choices made, well, they can be very uncomfortable. Because this is the only scriptural tapestry of stories in which the truth, the good and the negative, the not so good part of the stories are so emphatically told, often with unbridled, brutal honesty. Often it's not pretty. It's not comfortable. But it is genuine. The stories are authentic. And in this story, Mordecai, Esther, the king, their choices are real. They have to struggle with this. Remember, the rabbi said we have knowledge in this forbidden fruit deal, right? We have information. So it's a little different from the garden because with knowledge you have a place to apply something, right? We don't there. But here we do. So she holds back this information because it's not ready yet. But yet now, as we get to that point of the story, we are, right? Remember that analogy in the part about Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, right? Those scientists were also worried, but they didn't know if they could stop or if they should stop. Yeah? She could have told him who she was at the beginning. Remember, because we don't have Haman's edict in the story yet. In the very beginning, when she's contemplating telling him, and Mordecai says no. When we first meet Mordecai and Esther, again, that's held back. I highly suggest that you read this story. Please go read the Scroll of Esther because you're going to understand the timing of how all these things play out. Because that's not really covered here in the timing. That's not the way the rabbi's looking at. He's looking at story elements. So we're at a point in the story where she could have told him before, but Mordecai said, shouldn't. It's not time now. But after the Haman edict, all that plays out. And that's when he says, it's time. Now it should be told. How would the person receiving the knowledge take it? How would the king react? Because Esther's greatest fear, really, is how the king's going to respond. Because as we get to this part of the story, where it's getting turned on its head a little bit, so to speak, we have the thought of what you're doing, right? Because it's for someone else in this one. Let's be clear here. because the fear that Esther has that if I say this, he's going to kill me. Mordecai is telling Esther, if you don't do this, you're going to die anyways. Your family's going to die. All because it possibly could happen. Still, God's going to rescue us. But with you, you have the chance to do the right thing. We hear about everything, but sometimes we're unsure about what that looks like. We know God will work it out, right? We don't know how that's going to happen. Sometimes we see somebody. Something happens. We can see their involvement in God's part of the story. That can be really cool. But what if somebody else in the story, they had the chance to make an Esther-like response, but they chose not to see God's way play out? You know, at times we never see the other side of that story. Yeah. In this one, all we know is what we see in this story with these choices. Mordecai tells her that God will rescue her, but you must do the right thing because it's right. Is there a risk to you, meaning to yourself? So Esther's going, it could cost me, but I'll do it anyways. There's one part that gets me towards the end. This is why I have a slightly different opinion, a thought about Esther's response to Mordecai, about the rest of the children of Israel fasting. I have a different take. Because I don't think I'm as compelled that it's a reverse order back, right? That she's pointing it back. I think she's realizing that everybody needs to be on board because it's not just hers. Everybody's life is at stake. I'm chatting with a men's group, and we talked about this story. I brought it up, and I mentioned that Esther says, I want the children of Israel to fast. And my court, right? These are her young women who take care of the queen. They're going to have to fast too. And I stopped, and I pondered, and I thought about it. I sat back, and I went, it'd be interesting, because how do you tell the court they need to fast? They don't know who you are. They don't know that you're an Israelite. They don't know that you're a follower of God. They don't know the choice that you're contemplating. But Esther's going to ask them to fast for also, like her, for 3 days while she mulls this decision over. You know, for lack of a better term, today we might use the phrase, she's going to pray about it, right? I think this is what maybe some of that looks like, because here there's mulling over a decision that needs to be made. Am I doing the right thing? Am I seeking God? And I'm going, is this the right thing? Because I'm working through the fear that's underneath. It's a genuine fear. It's real. I don't know. It's the right thing. So the weird part is we have these people. They're not part of the story. They're just her court. They're not the children of Israel. And yet they're still involved. It's just interesting. Those things catch me. But Esther knows this is a big deal. We all need to be on board. We all need to be on the same page. So let's all fast. It's going to put us in the right mindset. And then pray to God for what's to come. Because things are going to ramp up. So next week we get to dive in. As we know, Esther decided to proceed with this. So it's not just a matter of going to the king. It's about, how will I do this? How will I approach him to make him understand so he doesn't take it out of context? how do I give him the reverence he deserves as king? And without interfering with that, and still tell him the information that he'll need to mull over, he is going to need to deal with it himself. Because she left by conveying the knowledge of the fruit. And it really was between desire. And in this one, it was Haman's desire versus the moral and right thing to do. To save lives. Any life. So we're going to get there next week. And I want you to remember a word. I wrote down a transition word. I'm not sure if it will call it, but let's go. Remember that term, that role that we talked about last week. I mentioned it, but this is what it is. The interconnection. Think about it. So thanks for joining us tonight for part 3 of our Can We Become Haman? With this series, and the folks all beta. I'm sorry, part 4. And thanks for with us tonight on the Dusty Feet.